soccer fans travel to the World Cup in Qatar in 3 years' time. The airport they arrive at, the roads they travel on, the hotels they stay at, and the stadiums they sit in will all have been made with the help of slave labor. Qatar is a tiny authoritarian Gulf state. It's the richest country in the world, but it lacks one thing: cheap labor. And so it's been importing hundreds of thousands of men from some of the poorest countries in the region, Nepal, Bangladesh, India, parts of Africa, to help it build its World Cup dream. It has a population of just 2.7 million, but now 2 million of them are migrant workers. Over the past 6 years, I've been documenting their lives for the Guardian newspaper from my base in Nepal. And my reporting started in the summer of 2013, when day after day, I would stand at the arrivals gate of Kathmandu's airport. And I would watch hundreds of young men come off flights from the Gulf. They'd come out the arrivals gate pushing trolleys, sometimes laden with big flat-screen TVs. It was sort of a symbol of their success, because migration to the Gulf works for some people. But then I would wait, and something else would come out of those arrival gates on those trolleys. Coffins, bearing the bodies of migrant workers. One of them was a young man called Ganesh Biswakarma, and I followed his coffin back to his village. Ganesh Biswakarma left his home in rural Nepal for a job in Qatar. 6 weeks later, he died of a cardiac arrest. He was just 16. Ganesh's story became part of my first report on Qatar. 6 years and about 40 articles later, I'm still going back. I was there last month and I heard about a construction worker who suddenly died in his sleep. He was called Rupchanda Rumba, and he was 24 years old. Now, when a journalist hears something like this, they have to go and investigate. So I found out some of his co-workers, and I went out to meet them. Now, it's a bit risky for foreign journalists to meet with migrant workers in Qatar. I know of at least 10 journalists who have been arrested or detained for doing so. So we met in the dark. They got into my car, turned the lights off, and they told me the story about Rupchandra. Rupchandra was a scaffolder on one of the new World Cup stadiums. Now, the committee that's organizing the World Cup make a big deal about the special way they treat these stadium workers. But Rupchandra's story illustrated everything that goes wrong when poor migrants go to Qatar. First of all, Rupchandra had spent a huge amount to get to Qatar. Migrants have to pay recruitment agents to go there. $1,000, $2,000, sometimes up to $5,000. And they don't have that money, so they borrow it at a high interest rate. So they're deep in debt before they've even left home. And then when they arrive in Qatar, often they find their salaries and their jobs are different to what they were promised. That was certainly the case with Rupchandra. He ended up being paid just $9 a day. You see, for many, a job in Qatar is not a route out of poverty, it's a trap. Now you might think, why didn't he just leave the job? Why didn't he go home? He can't. When he arrived at Doha's international airport, his employer confiscated his passport. And then Rupchandra and all the other 2 million migrant workers in Qatar are subject to an employment system called kafala. And under kafala, these workers are tied to their employer. They cannot leave the job and they cannot leave the country without their employer's permission. Kafala is a license to exploit. So I asked Rupchandra's co-workers, can you take me to where he lived and where he died? You see, migrant workers in Qatar don't choose where they live. Their employer houses them in vast labor camps. I mean, they're literally called labor camps. They're squalid, they're overcrowded, 8, 10, 12 men to a room. This is the camp that Rupchandra was living in when he died. It was a truly awful place to die. But I wasn't surprised to see it because back in 2013, when I first went there, I documented some of these camps. And they looked like this. This glittering world is built by men who live in a very different one.
त्यही हो प्रब्लम भनेको त्यही हो यहाँ हाम्रो अब त्यो टोयलेट बाथरुम हेर्दाखेरि त्यस्तै छ केही त्यसको सफाइ छैन हैन सब उस्तै छ यहाँ 12 एक रुममा चाहिँ 12 14 जना मान्छे हालेछ हैन 2 वर्ष भएको हामीले बेडै सिट दिए छैन भन्छ आफै किनेर ल्याऊ.
These labor camps on the outskirts of the capital Doha are home to thousands of migrant workers. In this camp, over 600 men share just 2 kitchens.
किचन भन्नुहुन्छ भने तपाईहरु गरे हेर्न सक्दैछन् त्यहाँ यति मच्छरहरु र यति सांगलाहरु कीटाणुहरु झिंगाहरु त्यहाँ भन्क्या हुन्छ त्यो झिंगा खाना बसिन्छ त्यही कारणले मान्छे नि बिमार हुन्छ.
So I asked Rupchandra's co-workers, why did he die? What happened? And they said early in the morning on June 23rd, while everyone was still in their beds, he started to struggle to breathe. They said he sounded like someone was choking him. And they panicked, they called an ambulance, they took him away, and it was too late. And so I went to the main hospital in Doha to find out why workers like Rupchandra are dying. And I found someone who had the answer. And he said to me, we don't really know why they're dying because we don't do autopsies. You see, Rupchandra's death was not a one-off. Hundreds of young men die in Qatar every year from so-called natural causes. But because there's no autopsy, we don't really know why they're dying, and the Qatari regime refuses to investigate. Now, Rupchandra had a wife, Nirmala, and a 6-year-old boy, Niraj. And I went to the committee organizing the World Cup and I said, look, this man was building one of your new stadiums. Have you paid his family compensation? And they said, yes, all compensation have been paid. That turned out to be a lie. Because I went back to Kathmandu. If you've been listening, you figure out I'm a really stubborn guy. I went back to Kathmandu and I met Nirmala and her son. And she said to me, no, I didn't get any compensation from Qatar. But I did get $590. And I said, $590? Where did that come from? And she said, Rupchandra's co-workers, the ones who are earning $9 a day, they all donated whatever they could afford, and they sent it to me. So in Qatar, you have tens of thousands of men laboring under what is effectively state-sponsored slavery. You have a man building a World Cup stadium who died, but no one investigated his death. You have his wife, who now has no husband, no income, and no compensation from the richest country in the world. And you have their 6-year-old son, who, his mother told me, keeps asking one question: where's my dad? Which leads to another question. Why does Qatar allow this? And after 6 years of reporting on this issue, I have one simple answer. They just don't care. I talked to one Nepali man who had lived and worked in Qatar for a long time. And he said, Pete, in Qatar there are no human rights because there's no humanity. And I think what he meant was this: the Qatari authorities don't see their migrant workers as human. For them, they are disposable. And so in Qatar, and indeed across the whole Gulf, the reason slavery still exists today is the same reason it has always existed, which is one race thinks it's superior to another. Now, up to a few days ago, this story I'm telling you had a different ending. But last week, the Qatari authorities announced some major reforms to their labor laws. Maybe they heard I was coming to talk here today. And what they said is by January, they will abolish the kafala system. Workers will be free to change their job. Workers will be free to leave the country, and they'll introduce a minimum wage. If this is properly enforced, it will represent a massive victory for people who are fighting for workers' rights in Qatar. It demonstrates that journalism has power, and it shows that given the right pressure, at the right time, in the right way, even authoritarian regimes can crack. But there's a big gap between a policy announcement and real change for workers. And for the tens of thousands who have already suffered in Qatar, for the thousands who have lost their lives, it's too late. So when the World Cup ends in a little over 3 years, I wonder what names you'll remember. Will it be the names of the global soccer superstars, Cristiano Ronaldo, Kylian Mbappe, Lionel Messi? Not me. The names I'll remember are Ganesh Vishwakarma, Rupchand Darumba, and his son Niraj, who is still asking the question, where's my dad? Thank you.